Well, good evening, everyone. I am Rabbi Greg Weisman from Temple Beth El in Boca Raton. It is a pleasure to be joining you this evening. I am here with two of my wonderful colleagues, Pastor Rachel Delaune from First United Methodist Church in Boca Raton and Father Ben Thomas from St. Gregory's Episcopal Church. And we are here tonight for a conversation that we are calling Clergying in the Time of COVID, where we're going to share a little bit about ourselves and what we have been doing here in the Boca Raton faith community as our entire country and our entire world has encountered this unfortunate pandemic. As we begin, I want to let everyone know what in the world and how in the world we are making this happen. So there are some of us who are gathering here on Zoom, and there are others who are watching on Facebook Live. And so for those of you who have joined us in the Zoom room, thank you so much for joining us this way. We are asking you to keep your microphones and your cameras off for the duration. But if you have questions or comments that you want to make during the presentation tonight, you should feel free to do so using the chat function that Zoom offers. For those of you who are watching us on Facebook Live, you can feel free to post comments in the comment section there as well. Our wonderful team is going to be relaying those messages from the Facebook posts into our conversation here on Zoom. And so know that those comments will be recognized as well. If you have not been or watched a Zoom experience on Facebook in the past, you should know there is a little bit of a delay, not a long one, but it may take a few moments for a comment or to make its way from here to there. But we are so excited for this conversation and want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to introduce my colleagues, Reverend Rachel Delaune. Rachel, how are you tonight? Rachel, how are you? Now we can hear you. Go ahead. How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys? Good to be here. I'm great. Thanks for inviting me to be a part of this.
Thank you.
Would you like me to go ahead and introduce myself?
Give me one second, because I want to talk a little bit about the
Methodist
introductions, but yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. And Father Ben Thomas, how are you tonight?
I'm great. Yeah, it's really happy to be here. Really honored, Rabbi Weisman and Rachel, to include me and this. You know, we're such colleagues. We're at the same sort of stages of our families and lives, putting our kids to bed, and yeah, so great to be here. Thank you.
So as we continue introductions, what I wanted to ask for each of you is to share a little bit about your personal story. How is it that you came to serve your congregation here in Boca Raton? Talk a little bit about what it means to become a Methodist minister or Episcopal priest, and a little bit about why it is that called you there. So Rachel, if you wouldn't mind going first, and then Ben will go, and then I'll share my story as well. Rachel, how did you come to be the pastor at First United Methodist Church here in Boca Raton?
Sure. Well, I grew up in a United Methodist Church. I grew up born and raised in Florida, and I heard my calling into ministry when I was about 14 years old. And I ran away from it for a long time, but finally I pursued what's called the ordination process for the United Methodist Church. And it can take anywhere from 5 years to 20 years, depending on what stage you start. But I began right at the middle part of college and left from Florida Southern College and went to Candler School of Theology up at Emory University. And that's where I received my Master's of Divinity degree. And throughout the entire time of college and seminary, I was pursuing my ordination process. I served a church in Atlanta, Georgia with my husband, Ryan. Then we moved down here to Gainesville, Florida, and then even further south to Boca. We've been pastors in the Boca community for 4 years now, and we have 2 little kids. But this was always a part. I grew up in the church. I grew up loving to be in the church community, and have enjoyed serving God in this way over the last 10 years.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Ben, tell us your story. How did you come to St. Gregory's? How did you become an Episcopal priest? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, it's a little convoluted, but it's I also grew up in the church, but I grew up in sort of a fundamentalist version of the church. And then, graduated high school, went to college in DC, completely revamped my faith, and just started going to a number of different denominations. I went to a PCUSA church in Washington, DC, and then I, moved to Chattanooga, went to PCUSA, a PCA church, where I was baptized. I moved to New York after I graduated from college with 6 friends. We lived in Brooklyn, and I started going to Eastern Orthodox Church for several years. Got married, to my wife Anna. Realized we wanted to start our children in a faith tradition. The whole time I'd been going to Episcopal churches for about 12 to 13 years, in addition to the other churches I was going to. I did a study abroad at Oxford, and then found the Anglican Church, and fell into this idea of liturgy for the first time in my life, the sort of call and response of where you had actually a participatory role to play in a church service. I was raised, and here's the whole list of all the ways that you cannot, the things you cannot do in order to engage with God. And when I found the liturgy, that we had a part to play in it, that here are all the ways that we could participate in the life of God. So it was huge for me. Came back from that, still lived in New York City for about 11 years off and on, and actually joined the Catholic Church. And then our 3 youngest kids were baptized into the Catholic Church as we were received into the Catholic Church, and then moved out of New York to Chattanooga, started the discernment, Chattanooga, Tennessee, started the discernment process through a job I had there, and a think tank, which is working with poverty alleviation and economic development in developing countries, and realized this was my time for discernment. And in the Episcopal Church way, you have, it could be, I've seen 9 months, but 1.5 to 2 years of a discernment committee, which is your local church and local churches and what we call our diocese, coming around you, meeting with you every week for at least a year to 1.5 years to discern your call to the priesthood. And for me, it was a huge luxury. And these incredible people, intergenerational, high schoolers to 80-year-olds, coming around and meeting every week to say, wow, we feel like you have a call. And then you go to seminary, and it's a 3-year process for us. And then you're ordained as a deacon through that process. And then you're ordained again as a priest, which I was in the cathedral in Miami. Once I was called to St. Gregory's, which was completely out of the blue. I had never heard of this church. I never heard of our bishop. I never had heard of Father Andrew. They reached out to me, and Florida was like the last place on our list. And within a couple months after interviewing on Skype, they flew us down, and we were like, wow. So here we are. We've been here 3 years. It's an incredible lively kingdom of God happening every day. And yeah, super honored. I really believe in call processes. So
can you say a bit, Ben, what does that mean, a call process? For those of us, for the Jews in the room, our process, which I'll explain in a moment, is a lot different than that. So use words like discernment and call, and Rachel used it as well. Can one of you say a little bit more about what that is, so we understand your process a little better?
Sure.
Yeah.
So the way I understand.
Rachel, help me out. Discerning. Yeah. No, go ahead.
It's saying my internet connection is unstable, so you may hear parts of this, but my call was automatically to serve God in some way, in some ministry, and I wrestled with that. I wanted to do music. I even studied music in college. But a call, so far as I can articulate it, is something where God is tugging at your heart, where your best gifts and the world's deepest needs meet, and you find that kind of aha moment. This is what I'm meant to do. And it is a struggle, and it is a lot of, like Ben was saying, a lot of time of discernment and gathering people around you. Hey, you know me well. You know where I struggle. You know what my gifts are. Help me understand. Am I really called to this, or is this just what I want to do? In my case, it wasn't what I wanted to do, but it became what I wanted to do. So it was just this tug on my heart that God would not let go of from age 14 to age 21, when I finally said, okay, if this is what you want from me, fling wide open the doors. I will follow. I will obey. I will respond. And then the logistical part of it was another 10 years of meeting with groups and mentors, writing lots and lots of papers, having lots of interviews, really interrogations in some ways, and really defending. Now in the Methodist Church, and also in Ben's tradition, women can be ordained, which I am blessed and honored to be a part of a progressive and open-minded congregation that does that, but not every denomination believes in women in leadership. So that was also something I had to work through in my own mind, but that's how I articulate a calling.
Interesting.
Interesting. That's, I mean,
it's very different
really
in the
well
Jewish
said.
community.
Rachel, I mean, yeah, that's, yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I mean,
in the Jewish community, it's a little bit different.
I don't, the interruptions are weird.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like for those of you who are watching that all three of us in three different places are having internet problems. I'm guessing it's 8 p.m. on the East Coast, and everyone has just turned on Netflix and is just sucking the life out of the entire internet across the world. But we'll get through this. I'm sure it'll stay a lot in a moment. What I was going to say was that this idea of discernment and of a call is a little bit different, I think, than the way that the Reformed Jewish community, and I know some of my colleagues outside of our movement understand this. I mean, for me, I grew up in a congregation in the Reform movement outside Chicago, but the idea of entering the rabbinate was like the farthest thing from my mind as a kid. I was pretty sure I was going to go to law school. And then it wasn't until I was in college that the idea of serving my community in this way really entered my mind. And it was a combination of some of the things I was doing, working as a camp counselor, and some of the learning that I was doing. And then all of a sudden I find myself in my early 20s saying, you know what, I think that entering the rabbinate is really where I want to spend my life. And so I spent a couple of years after college working for a really unique, interesting organization in Jackson, Mississippi, of all places, and serving the Jewish community of the Deep South, which, growing up in Chicago and living in Boston, no one that I knew my whole life had ever thought there were Jews in Mississippi. And I spent 2 years living down there and traveling around the Deep South and visiting communities there, until I found myself at our seminary at the Hebrew Union College, where I ended up studying for 6 years towards the rabbinate. And 7 years ago, this week, I was ordained as a rabbi, and I was at school in California, and had already been offered the position to come here to serve at Beth El in Boca Raton. And so in June of 2013, my wife and at that time our one daughter moved across the country to Boca, and now it's been 7 years and 2 more daughters, and we're pretty happy. And as Ben said, this community is a really powerful one. I mean, the love that I feel from the members, not only of Beth El, but really of the faith community around in Boca, is really strong and really powerful. And the friendships that we have built, the professional relationships, like we're sharing this evening, I think it's a really a wonderful testament to that. But as wonderful as our community is, it's been really hard. It's been really hard these last couple of months. It's been now almost 2 months to the day since our public schools were closed, since most of our preschools were closed. And, you know, as Rachel, Ben, and I were talking about this evening, we wanted to start with, you know, what has it meant, you know, for you all day today? How is the functioning of your church? How has the functioning of your family been affected? And I'll share just a little bit about Beth El. You know, within a couple of days, we created an entire new an entire new platform that we've been calling Virtual Bethel, where everything that we've done in person, from our learning experiences, both for our preschool and for our children and our youth and through high school and up to our adults, all of those classes had to get moved online. Our preschool is meeting online for about a half an hour a day per class, and our Sunday school the same way, and our adult learning opportunities. We had to move all of our worship online as well. And now we are spending a lot of time behind a camera and a microphone and in front of a computer doing things on Zoom and other platforms. And that's been basically what has sustained us through all of this. I think I've been to our synagogue building 3 times in 2 months, which is really unusual for us to make it, a part of our daily life of being there. So Rachel, you went first last time. So Ben, maybe you want to go this time. What has it meant for you? What has it meant for the church these last couple of months? How have you had to adjust to what this has meant for us?
Yeah, I mean, great question. And to echo Rachel's sentiment, I put off the priesthood for a long time too. I was like, we have 5 kids. I was like, it's like financially impossible, and I was like, there's no way. And then, it worked out, and we went through this process. And now we find ourselves, my wife works part-time from home. I'm working full-time from home. Although I am here at some portions of the day, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. So at some point, with 1 or 2, 3 people. But in addition to that, we have 5 kids we had to scramble to get computers for to do also teaching online school from home within a couple days. So, it really, to their credit, it took a couple days to get them online, and they're like, little Zoom ninjas, you know what I mean? They're like, know it so well, and they can, session in, session out. But it's been interesting for 7 of us to be online all at the same time. I take a lot of my Zoom calls from the garage because it's quiet with a virtual background, right? So that we know these things now. And but again, like just what you said, Greg, within 2 days, we went from a church proper, a decently large church proper to a virtual church in 2 days. And have done we're actually doing more things than we were doing in the first place. And so it strikes me that we're in the biggest teachable moment, the biggest rabbinical moment of my life, at least our lives. And I find it exhilarating. It's also interesting as you work that out intergenerationally. Certain people are on certain paths with technology and the willingness to go into technology, and which we can get into later. This moment is so highly politicized. It's really a struggle, and it'll be a struggle as we sort of reintroduce and reopen as we have these conversations with the church. But I mean, it's been, our kids have been really creative. I found it amazing to log on to Facebook every Sunday or any day of the week, and you have your option of where you want to worship all over the world. And that's, I think we've seen all of our interactions increasing, right? Like there was more people in the pews than we had before. So that's what encourages me about it being such a teachable moment. How do we play with that energy? How do we work with that? How do we interface with this in intimate ways? I feel like, just because we're meeting virtually, I feel like it's just reality in a different way. It's not less of intimacy. So I've been trying to talk about that as much as I can.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. Rachel, how about you? How has the functioning of the church been affected by all this?
Well, I echo what both of you have already shared. It's been a challenge, and honestly, every week we've gotten better. We've figured out sort of the kinks. We've figured out recording early. Like I'm going to record my sermon on Thursday night, which is strange since I'm usually still chewing on it on Saturday night to prepare for Sunday. But as I was thinking about this, as I was thinking about this question and this really the whole topic that we're talking about tonight. In this coaching group that I'm a part of, we wrestled with a text that's holy to both of our traditions, Ecclesiastes 3. We read it a lot at our celebration of life services, but it says that for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. And then in verse 5, it says there is a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. And as soon as I read that, I thought, goodness, this is stay 6 feet away from me kind of language. This is so very hard to what I'm called to do. We are called to be people that love others, pastors, rabbis, priests. And there's been several people that have died in our congregation, and I can't hug their loved ones. I've done a funeral just last Thursday, and I couldn't embrace the brother, the son and daughter. I had to wear a mask when I was reading scripture. It's just so strange. But at the same time, the blessing in all of this is just to remember how connected we all are as people that bear the image of God, that we need each other. And yes, we're connecting through Zoom or Facebook Live or these other venues, which has been beautiful. But the challenge for me has been just wanting to be with my people again, wanting to hug them, wanting to hold their hand, wanting to feel like I can be close enough to look into their eyes. And that has been really tough. But we are figuring it out each week, how to do it better. And unlike Ben's family, we only have 2 children, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. So they have loved the extra time with mom and dad as we have worked from home. So they're handling it really well, but it's been a balancing act on all fronts.
So as you both shared, I'm wondering, are you, for your worship, are you able to worship from home, or do you need to utilize things that are in your buildings, in your churches, that are a required part of your worship? I mean, for us, we have been worshiping and leading worship from our services from our homes for about 6 or 7 weeks now, and we've been doing it live, right? Every Friday night we are on in real time, which has its ups and downs. But there's Rachel, you mentioned the idea how unusual it is to pre-record so far in advance, and we've been able to avoid some of that because we're doing it live. But that also means that we're doing it live, and live can mean a whole bunch of things can happen, but we're able to do it because we're able to be separate from each other, because we don't need to utilize anything in our building. Jews can worship together or separately anywhere around the world. So if either one of you want to comment just about, like, are there things in your building that you have to use? I know, Ben, I've seen you on Facebook a lot in your church and in the chapel there. Just say a bit about that. Like, how is it to be in your space versus out of your space?
Yeah, I mean, great question. It's a huge question in the Episcopal Church, and people fall really strongly on either side. And ultimately, Andrew's director called this, and I agree with it. I mean, as I said, this is a huge rabbinical moment. I think what the Episcopal Church has failed at in the last decade is that we haven't had enough rabbis. We haven't had enough teachers. And so we have these cradle Episcopalians who don't know Episcopal or Anglican identity. So we've seen it as, atrocities aside, not to minimize the deaths at all, terrible things happening, healthcare workers, sanitation workers, all these people in the front lines, huge honor and props to these people. On the flip side, I think it's been a boon for our church, the Episcopal Church, because we've been able to teach the Benedictine roots. The rule of Saint Benedict is one of the oldest Western monastic traditions that survived in Western monasticism to this day, because it's so practical, and that means that you can adapt it to your circumstance, your church. So the mantra of the Benedictine way of life is ora et labora, which means prayer and work, and that's the atmosphere around which the Episcopal Church runs its daily life. So we have this thing called the daily office, which is in the Book of Common Prayer. And we do daily, it was 7 offices of prayer a day. The Benedictines, sort of trimmed it down to 5. So we have morning prayer, and our church is always, so Father Andrew has been here, starts prayer with the staff and whoever else wants to come in every morning at 9 a.m. in the chapel of St. Mary's, doing morning prayer. There's noon prayer. We're now doing evening prayer. So Anna and I and my family do evening prayer every Thursday night from our house. Father Andrew is doing evening prayer Tuesday nights from his home with his wife, Anita, and kids. We do Compline in our sort of daily worship is night prayers. And it's a very short, like 10 to 12 minutes, sealing off the day and reflection, and then moving forward. And we do Eucharist, we do noon Eucharist Monday through Friday, every, in the chapel. And then we have our principal Eucharist on Sundays at 10. I'm teaching 3 adult formation classes. One of those is team taught with Father Andrew. I mean, it's like, it's been this great moment for, where on a normal Monday or, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday for morning prayer, there's with staff, 5 people, right? Now it's like, 87 or, 65. For noon Eucharist, like it's in the 100s when normally we'd have 10 people. Wow. So it's just this time where we're able to actually introduce the tradition of our church, and our faith and our way of living our daily lives that people didn't even know about, even though they've been, maybe have been Episcopalians all their lives. So for me, it's been a really teachable moment. People are like, what is daily, what is morning prayer? I was like, turn to page, blah, 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 and the Book of Common Prayer, and here it is. And, reading of the Psalms, and, it's a daily practice in the Episcopal Church alone. If you attend all the services throughout the week and Sunday services, you actually read through the entire Hebrew Testament, Hebrew Scripture, and the New Testament in 3 years. So we're a very Scripture-based denomination, which has kind of gone unrealized. So, but I think it's being really realized now as we have these moments of like, oh, this is why we do what we do. So it's been, again, such a teachable moment, and people are being able to sort of like, say here's the Book of Common Prayer, here's the Bible, the canonical Bible. This is how these 2 books speak to each other. So the intertextuality is becoming more evident, and people are attending our classes more and more. And I think it's just been way more interaction than we've even had before. And so I think it's a real win.
Yeah. Rachel, how about you? Are you guys doing your worship from the church? Are you able to do it from home? A combination of the two? How has that been for First United Methodist?
Yes, it is definitely a combination. We don't have to be in the church to have worship. We do need to use the church for music parts. Like music is a very important part of our tradition. We go back and forth between traditional sort of choir hymn songs and contemporary worship songs. And so those are all pre-recorded in our worship space. We have 2 campuses, an East Campus and a West Campus. We've recorded at both. The sound guy and the video guy is a volunteer who has a full-time job and a wife that's on the front lines as a nurse in ICU. So we work around his schedule because he is our hero right now. He's not a paid person on staff, which I know does present a problem for a lot of faith communities. Like, who's going to do this? So for Sean, his name is Sean, we work around his schedule, and he will meet us at the church because that's just where the best sound quality is. It's where the best, where the camera that we bought works and functions best. So we do most of our recordings there, but I've done a sermon out on our West Campus on our prayer labyrinth. Greg, your family has been there for our pumpkin patch. So we've done a lot of outdoor sermons. People have recorded things in their backyard. God is everywhere, of course. So we don't have to be in our holy sacred space But for us, logistically, with music and video quality, that's what's worked best. But again, all pre-recorded before the weekend.
Yeah, music. That's primarily the reason, Rachel, that we're here on Sundays. With the organ, the piano, and all that.
Right.
But even our organist has done stuff from his apartment. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We have our cantors set up in their home with the keyboard, and they are self-accompanying as we make our way through our worship. And it's been, as we're beginning to think already about what the next 6 months are going to bring in the High Holy Days. Like, one of the things that we're really thinking about is that in our congregation, we typically for the High Holy Days have an accompanist and a double quartet and the cantor times 2, because we're at 2 services at the same time at our synagogue and at FAU. And we're already wondering, like, how are we going to be able to create that musical experience for our community come September, October, depending on what the reality is. For those of you who are wondering if I'm going to sneak peek an answer, the answer is no, because we don't have one. We're able to
Exactly.
get that right now, but we're really trying to figure it out. It's not been easy. But if I think about the High Holidays, I also think about what really, for the 3 of us brought this conversation together, which was that a month ago, we were in the middle of a different holy time, right? We in the Jewish community were getting ourselves ready for Passover. The Christian community was preparing for Easter. And I was like, how is it that, a day like Easter and a week like Holy Week in the Christian community, well, this was really, I think we had moved from the idea of this is going to be a short and a minor inconvenience. By the middle of April, it had really realized, wow, this is something really serious and really significant. What did that do for your communities in terms everything from how did you plan for Easter? How did you have to adapt for Easter? I know that for a lot of congregations, the days in which a lot of people come into the building is an important day in the financial health of the community. For Christians, coming to church on Easter is a big deal. For Jews, we don't really go to temple so much on Passover. It's more of a home holiday, which I'm happy to talk about. But how did you do Easter when you couldn't get together?
Well, I'll start because we're going back and forth. So for us, I think I'm with you, Greg. It sort of finally hit me by the first week of April, like this is not going to be a normal Holy Week or Easter for us. We had sort of started planning that was how it was going to happen. And so we've got some great members on our staff that we have a children's family team that put together with the help of the pastors a video for Maundy Thursday. So typically on Thursday nights in our tradition, we celebrate the foot washing and the Last Supper that Jesus had with his disciples. And so we walked them through the liturgy, but we did it in a modern, kid-friendly form. We asked them all to go get their own bread and juice or Coke and Doritos or whatever. And we blessed the meal and encouraged the family to have Holy Communion together. We got a lot of good feedback from that. So that was one thing we did during Holy Week. Our tradition, or I should say our denomination, puts a lot of focus on the butterfly. And so our church has always done a butterfly release on our both East and West campus. And so again, thinking ahead, we knew that we still had butterflies that we had ordered. We knew that this was sort of a part of the DNA of our church that people look forward to every year. And so butterflies were delivered on Saturday with some scripture, with the conversation about how the butterfly relates to the resurrection. And then the families could choose either Saturday or Sunday to release those butterflies together in their neighborhood and have that conversation with their children. But it was very strange to not be together on Easter Sunday. However, I've heard from a lot of people that, as Ben has shared, a lot more people have been engaged in worship and were attentive to that Holy Week this year, probably now more than ever, which we are thankful for, that folks are finding new ways to engage and be relevant in the world. So those were some things that we did differently for our Easter week.
Ben?
I love the metamorphosis of the butterfly. We had closed down the week before, or several weeks before, and Holy Week here has been from Palm Sunday, which is when Jesus rides on the donkey into Jerusalem, to the following Sunday, which is Easter Sunday. We have had 22 services. So that did not happen. And it was, the time of Holy Week is so fleshy and incarnational. It's raw because we're incarnational beings in the Christian religion. The God that divine, the God became human, and Jesus sort of bridges this gap between the divine realm and the human realm, and in ways that is a holy mystery that we barely understand, but we articulate in our liturgy. So yeah, I mean, we have Shrove Tuesday, which is the pancake supper, which we usually play games and do cornhole and have a big pancake thing, and the kids. It's right before Mardi Gras, and then Maundy Thursday is a huge service where we mimic Jesus washing the feet of the disciples in this act of servant leadership, and we have all of our people in our congregation come forward, and the clergy wash their feet, and then they wash our feet, and we wash our kids' feet, our kids wash our feet, and it's this really raw, fleshy sort of moment, which is so powerful. You know what I mean? It could almost be it's very similar to the Eucharist, this divine exchange of recognizing the divinity and the humanity is so bound up in this dance. But we didn't do it because we were closed, and so we did a service of the Eucharist. Our tradition is at the end we strip the altar, so we take everything off the altar and we wash the altar with water, holy water, and then everything's removed from the space as preparation for Good Friday, because it's called the Great Triduum in our tradition, Triduum meaning 3 days. So it's actually one service that lasts for 3 days. So it starts on Thursday, goes through Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and then you have the Easter Vigil on Saturday night. So Saturday night vigil, which is unfortunately, fortunately it's the best service in our whole tradition, the Easter Vigil on Saturday night. It's the least attended, at least here and in some places, because people go to the triumphal, Easter Sunday, where we have the brass and the trumpets and all that, triumphalness. But the Easter Vigil traditionally in Christianity starts in the dark, late on Saturday night, with candles all around, and then halfway through the service we sort of burst into the light, sort of the darkness coming, the light coming into the darkness, and it could not be overtaken. So we do a lot of readings from the Hebrew Scripture. There are 9 total. I think we read 7 to 5 depending on the day, but it's such a beautiful service in the dark, and we did it from our homes this time. So we did a 3-part Facebook Live instead of doing it from the church. So my family started at our house, candlelit little altar that we made for ourselves. And we did the Liturgy of the Word, which are all the Hebrew Scripture readings. And then we went off Facebook Live and broke to Andrew and Anita and his family, and they did the Eucharistic portion of it from their home. And then they broke off, and then we went to our choir master and organist in his apartment, and he gave us, this grand, musical meditation, and it really worked, and it was really cool. Sort of 3-part. First time we had tried it. I love the intimacy because it sort of matches the rawness of Holy Week and Easter and Incarnation in general. So, What about you, Greg?
Well, so for us, Passover is a very different type of holiday. It's not a day where the worship service is the focus. The focus for Passover is the Seder, right? Is the meal that we celebrate to begin the festival, and the reading of the Haggadah, which is the book that which literally means in Hebrew the story. It's the telling of the story of Passover. Not only the iterations of it that come to us from the Bible, but also the generations of rabbinic commentary that come later about what all this means, right? And often, depending on who's leading it and who's there, Seder can often go 3 or 4 hours long around the table, and it's there's a meal in the middle, but it's also very ritualistic. Ben, in some of the ways you describe what you all do for Holy Week. We have foods that stand in for certain parts of the story, whether it's the roasted shank bone that stands in for the Paschal sacrifice, or the matzah that reminds us of the affliction, and the salt water for our tears. All these things. It's this highly ritualized experience. Now, you don't need to do it with a big number of people. You can do it with just a family of 2 or 3 or 4 potentially, or even one individual. But there's the Passover has in it this notion, and it's in the Haggadah itself, where we hold up the matzah and we say, "This is the bread of our affliction that our forefathers ate in the land of Egypt. Let all who are hungry come and eat." And one of the cultural traditions around Seder is you want to have a big crowd around your Seder table if you can, and you actually want to invite people to join, people who haven't been before. It's this time when we open the doors of our home and cram them in. And so for us, that was the part that was so hard to overcome around Passover, because it was going against 3,000 years of muscle memory of inviting people in for Passover. And we had to say to everyone, not only can you not invite guests, you can't even go to your grandparents' house, you can't go to your cousin's house. It really needs to be households only as we gather for dinner. Now, we found ways around that. So a lot of people hosted Zoom Seders. And so when we had the first night Seder at our house, we had the 5 of us here in Boca. We had family other parts of South Florida, family in Chicago, family in New Orleans, and family in California, all participating in the Seder together. Which in the past years, all of those people have been with us in our home at certain years for Passover. We did it all separately. Our congregation typically doesn't do a Seder the first night because everyone's home with their families, but we often have 100 or 200 people gather in the synagogue for a second night Seder, the second night of the festival. And so this year we did on Zoom, and we had several hundred people who joined in that way. One of the things that we thought to do was, because we're really concerned that there were a lot of people in our community who live alone and who have been alone in their apartments through this time. And so during the Seder experience, there's a pre-meal set of rituals. Then there's the eating of the meal itself, which is done just sort of around a table. There's nothing ritualized about it. Then there's the post-meal rituals. So when we broke for dinner, we created Zoom breakout rooms. So people who were alone could have dinner conversation with other people who were alone during that part of the Seder before they rejoined. And we also did, from my house the second night, we typically have a young family Seder that we hosted as well. And we had people all over the country participating in that. So it was very different than we're used to. We tried to capture the cultural pieces of gathering with people for Seder, but it was very different being alone. What's interesting is people have told me since the holiday that now they're stuck because, especially living in South Florida, which, for many of us, this is not where we're from. We've moved here for our career, or we moved here in retirement. And a lot of members of our community have their friends that they call family here in South Florida, who they gather with for Seder year after year after year, even though they're not blood relations. This year, they didn't do that. They gathered with their blood family online with a Zoom, but they've said to me, now I don't know what we're going to do next year. We love being with our family who we were together with on Zoom this year, but we don't want to abandon our family, our found family here in South Florida. And I think that is what's good. I think that the way through that is what I think is going to happen as a way from all of this, which is we have learned in the last 2 months, myself, as a person, as a rabbi and part of a congregation, we've learned to do things like this online that we never thought of doing before, even though we always could have. Tammy and I have been having dinner dates or after dinner dates with friends of ours from growing up, from college, from wherever around the country that we never talked to. And we're talking about like a month because we just, you know what, let's set up the camera, we set the table and have a glass of wine or whatever, have dessert. And we're having, you know, we're catching up people that we don't see very much at all. We're like, well, why were we doing this before? And we never really thought about it. And so as I think about how the temple is going to come back to life in person over what I think is going to be months, not weeks, but months, I think that we're not going to get rid of this piece of it. Like all the things, Ben, you're talking about, all those classes that you were teaching, and Rachel, the things that you're doing online, and us as well, like they're going to go back to being in person. But I imagine there are going to be a lot of hybrids, right? Where there's going to be people with us together in the room and then people participating online in real time. And like if we can figure out how to do that, I think it's going to make our faith communities that much stronger as a result of all of it. Which is kind of where I wanted to end our conversation tonight before we open up for questions, which is the blessings that have come of all this. And you know, we all recognize just the utter devastation that this has brought, right? The tens of thousands of people who have lost their lives, and the hundreds of thousands around them who have lost loved ones, the 30 million people who have lost their jobs. This is not an easy time in our history. And we're going to look back on this, I think, with a feeling of immense sadness that this befell us. And yet there are things, I think, that you know, us as faith leaders, but just I think us as human beings who have divinity in each of us, to try to find the blessings in that. You know, Tammy has mentioned to me that like life just feels slower right now. And we probably needed that, right? We needed the opportunity to slow down, you know, also working from home and being available to the family. And I haven't had dinner with my family this much in 7 years. You know, and it's not, doesn't mean that I'm not going to, well, do something like this after dinner, of being in the home together for breakfast, lunch, and dinner most days has allowed me to do things with my kids I haven't often get to do. And so there's blessings in that. And then there's, I think, what's going to come out of the congregations as well. So I wanted to wrap up our banter before we go to questions, which is, what are some of the blessings that the two of you have learned to appreciate that have come out of this unique moment in time?
Yeah, I mean, to keep the order, I guess I'll go ahead. To me, I thought about this a lot. You know, going for runs every day. You know, it's been my prayer time, and like sort of hanging out in the garage and hanging out with the kids and helping with school. It really strikes me that this pandemic is this pandemic is a mirror, and I think this pandemic is a portal.
Yeah.
And what I mean by the pandemic being a mirror is that it's really forced us to look at ourselves, that mirror that God gives us, right? Look at yourself as God sees you, and it can be difficult. It can also be really joyful, but we've had to let go of the clinging that we do to all the buffers we put in our lives that help us ignore the reality of our spiritual relationship and the dynamism that is an experience of God within us, right? And so we've been stripped down, and we've had to face it, and or we could deny it, right? So that's always the two sides of that, depending on your proclivity. But if we want to go there, it strikes me this has been a huge time to see this pandemic as a mirror. What is essential? What really matters? Spending time with my families, having dinner with them, having breakfast, lunch, going for walks. It's put it to us like this. I can't think of it anymore. Richard Rohr talks a lot about mirroring theology, and I feel like that's been sort of the name of the game, which for me, is brought in this whole point, which I say in every teaching moment I can get. The greatest thing about the spiritual life is that nobody can do it for you. The most challenging thing of the spiritual life is that nobody can do it for you, right? So we're caught between this, and the pandemic to me has been a mirror, if we choose to look into it, to see ourselves as we really are, to see our true selves, to see ourselves as God sees us. And what are we going to do with that? Or how are we going to wrestle with the things that we need to send to the door that no longer serve our transformation, right? And how are we going to grow the things that do work and are generative to our transformation. And if we choose that path, then the pandemic, it strikes me, can also be a portal into a new way of being, into our transformation, into what God is sort of calling us into being. You know, we'll have no more time than we've had now to really think about, pray about, meditate on what God is trying to make manifest through our own lives. And we have unique gifts, and each of us has, you know, a different way to make this manifestation happen. So how do we tap into this moment that is both a mirror, showing ourselves and all of our, you know, greatness and all of our weaknesses, but take that with humility and go through the portal for your spiritual growth. And I think our yearning and our desire to go to see this pandemic as a portal will take us all the way to our transformation. So that's what I've felt really powerfully. And it's hard, conscious work. You know, it's what modern day people call mindfulness. You know, I think it's deeper than mindfulness, but it's like conscious work really gets at the heart of that. Conscious love, you know, really, we see this in every circumstance, in our partnerships with whoever we're with, and our families and our jobs. You know, those who feel like they, it's called into question as a mirror. How do you define yourself? Do you find yourself by your work? Do you find yourself by your job title? Do you define yourself by all these little I's? You know, I'm a priest, I'm a pastor, I'm a rabbi, you know, I'm an addict, I'm a, you know, fill in the blank, right? Those are not all of who we are. Those are just small aspects of who we are. And it strikes me that this pandemic has really brought to front and center what is the capital I? Your identity as how God sees you. And so if we can seize this teachable moment, I feel like so many cool things can happen if we go through that portal.
Yeah. Wow. That's really,
Yeah.
that's amazing, Ben. Thank you for, yeah.
Sure.
Rachel, you
Ben,
want to follow up?
I don't know what else to say. Ben, that was beautiful. The mirror and the portal, the image of that. As you were speaking, three blessings just kind of came. One, to piggyback on the family aspect. I already shared. I have 2 kids. I'm married. Been married almost 10 years. I will say, what a blessing it has been to have this one-on-one time with my kids. We've been potty training my 2-year-old. I've discovered things about both of my children. I know, right? Continue to pray for us. We've had these moments, and they've been hard. And gosh, the days are long and the years are short is so true. But Ryan and I have grown closer through this tough time, through this challenge. We've been solidified more as a family. You know, I've joked with my congregation, we might need to do more marriage counseling for everybody after this pandemic.
I love that, by the way. I mean, it's totally true. You made me think of that. Yeah.
Yeah. But if we're healthy individuals, anytime we walk through a challenge, we are asking, what is God trying to teach me in this moment? And for me, I've learned to prioritize my family. It's been given to me. This has been a gift. Before I'm a minister to anyone else, I'm a minister to my family. They're my priority. And this has been forced on me in a very wonderful way. So that'd be my first blessing. The second blessing, I'd just say, look at our world. Look at how the creation that the Creator gave us is recovering during this time. We don't talk enough about the damage we have done as humans to our world. And not that I believe that God ever causes things like this to happen, but man, God is using this for good, as we are seeing for the first time in many, many years, the clear water in Venice. And I've been to Venice 4 times. That water is never clear. But we have destroyed this great creation that God has given us. And look at this reset that we now have, as we can praise God back by letting things be refreshed and renewed. So that's been a blessing to see. And the third is something we've alluded to the whole time, which is just how important relationships are. And I see even more authority that I have as a pastor, as somebody that preaches and teaches and hopefully brings good news and conviction. When I call people, and we do a lot of calling now, when I call people, especially older people, I say to them, as your pastor, I hope you're staying home. You know, I love you, I miss you, I can't wait to see you again, but I hope you're being safe. And that means more, it weighs more, I think, because we're coming from a place of love and concern. And so those relationships are more influential, I think, during this time, both as a religious leader, but also just as a friend, as a person that cares. So those family creation relationships have been my top blessings as I've processed these last 8 weeks.
Yeah. Rachel, what you said makes me think about that. One of the things that I think has come out of this is that for many of us, we have rediscovered what really matters in our lives. What are the things that in absence we are desperately missing and can't wait to bring back into it? And one of the things that we realize, you know what? I don't need that. I don't miss it. It's not there. I mean, I was talking with a member of our community a few days ago, and she shared with me that her work has decided that she's going to be working from home permanently, not just through the pandemic, but forever, because they realized that everything that she was doing, she was able to do as effectively from home as she was in person. And there were all kinds of upsides to her working from home. I think it's going to happen for some of us, but I don't want to focus on work. But I'm just the notion that there are things that we're learning about the way that we operate, the things that we feel are important in our lives, the things that we feel are unimportant in our lives, that we have learned from this because it's been put into this unusual relief of this is what you can do and this is what you can't do. And so as we grow back into a new version of ourselves, keeping that in mind, I think is another blessing that we should take from this, which is don't rush back to the things that you always did if you didn't miss it when you weren't doing it all along. And look for the opportunities to grab onto those things that you know will sustain you in the future when we rejoin with them. I do want to move. We have one question that came in from Facebook from my friend Molly. It's a strong question. It's a difficult question. And she said, everyone's speaking about PTSD as a result of the physical and emotional losses that have come from this virus and the pandemic. And how do we see the role of religion, and I'll add to that our faith communities, in assisting others in coping now and for the future? I'm going to answer last because I'm ultimately answerable to Molly, so she's a member of my community. So, Rachel and Ben, how are you preparing yourselves, and how are you dealing with the mental health crisis that is already coming out from this, and we imagine is going to get, is in some ways festering when people can't access the help that they need, but we know is going to come on strong once we're able to get, more connected with each other in a physical sense?
Well, I've always been an advocate for counseling, mental health counseling. I see a spiritual director once a month, and it's something I model for my staff and really anyone that would listen to me talk about it. But I think at this point, as we move into what happens now, I think pastors, priests, rabbis, people on staff at religious and faith communities need mental health counseling as a part of their job in order to do their job well. I think that we need to be ready to just to recommend out, to reference out to other people, other places. We live in a town where there's lots of universities and incredible health professionals that we can send them to. But I think continuing to talk about it, preaching about it,